the idea of this workshop really is about, what does it mean to be an art writer and how one approaches the idea of art writing. So I wanted to start at the beginning by asking each of the panelists in turn how, when they're looking at a work of art, how they start thinking about writing about it. So maybe I'll start with you, Timothy and Clark.
Well, first, Patricia, let me thank you for organizing this panel, and I want to say how honored I am to be here with these three powerhouses. My approach is naive, which in some ways, doesn't leave me too much to say about it. But I, try as much as possible to work back from the work. It's one of the things that I like about writing about art is the concreteness of it. That you always can just say, well, there. And in some ways, we might think that in contemporary art, the there isn't always so much there. We might be looking at documentation of a performance that happened elsewhere, or tracing evidence of a project that has transpired in somebody's, private space over the course of a decade or something like that. So the there and the concreteness for me then means, whatever it is that I am presented with, or whatever it is that we are presented with. It seems to me that art criticism always entails a kind of what I think in journalism otherwise is talked about as new journalism, that sense of reflecting on your own experience and your own involvement, and however that transpires. And,
Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm going to start with a couple little anecdotes, because I went to graduate school in the 1960s and 1970s, and a lot of studying art history, and a lot of the teachers I had at that time were really art historians who'd been trained in Europe, had been very much trained in connoisseurship, believed that the object was invested in a sort of language, in a visual language that had to be learned and that could be understood by application and comparison and analysis and all of those things. I sort of absorbed that. I got out of school, and I eventually ended up back in San Francisco, and I began occasionally to be invited to come into studio classes and do a crit. Now, cold crit, that is, you don't know the students, it's not your institution, you don't know the work, you don't know anything about it. And the first invitation, I panicked. So I said to my husband, what am I going to do? How do I do this? He's a painter. And he said, well, you forget about that you're going to get it by looking at the work. It's not going to happen in lots of cases. So you better start with your own question. And what exactly is it that you are doing here? Which will give you some clues about how to enter this, what could be a really unfamiliar territory. The reason I'm telling you those is just not to embrace or reject either one of those approaches, but simply to say that it was only gradually over the next years that I began to see, for me, the necessity of, in fact, incorporating both of those things into the way that I approached works of art, particularly works of art with which I wasn't very familiar or familiar at all in some cases. That is, to develop enough confidence to approach the work directly and let the work emerge, but also to sort of call on a lot of other ways of making an entry into the work. Now, for me, trained as a historian, one of those was certainly to establish context. And context could be established in many, many different ways. The artist could supply some sense of the context. What one knows about history can supply context. Stylistic analysis can supply context. Iconography can supply, theory can supply context. There are many, many ways of thinking context. But in the end, and to conclude this before it's a lecture, in the end, I think that what has remained always very, very important to me is to somehow feel that I am able to engage with work in some way that allows me to understand the intentionalities of the work and to supply something to the elaboration of that.
Yeah. Can you hear me at this removed from the microphone, or do I have to?
You good?
Is it all right? Yeah, I like Clark's sense of naivety. I think that you should try to approach the work as naively as possible, leading to maybe the greatest, that is, you just don't know, and try to also forget everything that you do know or think you know. And this is on the way to the greatest possible curiosity about the work, which can include what Whitney was just talking about, which is, what sort of purpose is at work here? Why would anybody? I like to look at work as if I'm a Martian. I mean, these Earthlings, why are they doing these things? And not necessarily with a scowl, but sort of mild curiosity, and something like a Martian's version of anthropology. And then the naivety also includes clearing the range, getting all of your words, which sometimes strike me as, literally strike me as swarms of, no-see-ums or mosquitoes between me and seeing the work. Get those out of the way. Get all your art history out of the way. Look very hard. And I found that that's possible to do. And then you can regroup, as it were, your troops, your artillery, your knowledge. You don't kid yourself that you're, coming completely fresh to this thing. And but that's my initial process anyway. I try to get to clear as much as possible all that stuff that would be between me and seeing. And then you go into this sort of process, which is the classical process of, if it's a work that registers by sensation, Clark mentioned that there's work that registers by documentation, which means immediately you're there with words. The wall text, for instance, which may preempt anything that you may have to say. Because often I feel that work that is heavily dependent on or actually exists mainly in the wall text leaves me with very little to do, practically nothing. So, I may enjoy it, but I don't want to write about it because it's already, in a way, been written about. I too could lecture forever, but that's where I'll stop for now.
Often when I'm the last to speak on a panel, I'm always thinking that no matter what the previous people have to say, I agree with each one and turn wholeheartedly. And I don't know if any of you have that, negative capability, or, like everything sounds right to me. So at the end of the day, I don't really know what I think about looking at the object. I guess the whole the larger question, I guess, is like, why are we then writing about it? We were all talking about what it's like to look at a work of art, but what do we hope to do with our writing? In my case, the naivete, that's me. I'm not trained really to do anything. The context, Whitney, that you talked about is like, yeah, we all bring our own context to whatever it is that we're doing, and I really do that, I think, more than most art writers. It's impossible for me to take that out of the story of my own life that I'm carrying around with me at all times, like my own subjectivity that's going to go everywhere that I go, and this discovery of this painter or that performance is like, wow, this is a big thing for me. Now, how to get that across to or make it interesting to the general public, I'm not sure. But I also think there's something about, I was teaching this class at CCA, and it was like a reviews course or something, and there was one faction in our group that was, don't write about anything unless you disagree with it, you know.
It's easier.
Yeah, you know, like why do that if you're just going to, you know, repeat what previous scholars or whoever have said, or fans. And then the other faction said that there was room for repetition in writing. Somebody else will have written this already. You can't go back and check everything, unfortunately. Okay, so those are my basic answers.
Okay. How's that? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Leading into the next question by way of example, you writing, art criticism is pretty much my primary activity around art these days. And so I find that when I've decided to write about something, I'm almost immediately sort of talking to the paper. Already trying to take what I'm thinking and get it into words as quickly as possible. And that's a way of sort of leading into a question about audience and about who you're writing for, and that translation of Bill of what you said, like after clearing the range of regrouping, and as you're regrouping, how you're thinking about who you're writing for.
Well, I had this, my graduate school, I sometimes think that I completed my undergraduate, I come from New York, and I got into all this because of the shorthand for this is the New York School of Poets and Painters and others, ballet dancers and so on. So my completion of my undergraduate career was the Cedar Bar, and my graduate studies happened at Art News, which was a great magazine that I went to work for in 1960, not the same magazine that goes by that name today. And the editor there was a man named Thomas B. Hess. And when I eventually graduated from being a kind of copy boy, which I was for the first year and a half or more, and started writing reviews, I had to ask him, as many people did, well, how do you do this? And he said, write it as if you were writing a letter to a sensitive and intelligent friend, but one who has no patience for your bullshit. And that has, been my, over my desk in a way forever after. It's the only way that I can think to do it. Bad criticism tends to be, the worst tends to be where you see that the writer has no clue as to an addressee, no clue as to a human reader, but something called a general reader or a museum catalog audience. And the perfect response to this is, who the hell do you think you're talking to?